Hi, how are you?
Good. It's nice to see you again.
It's so amazing to see you again. I still can't believe this is happening right now. But I just want to say good evening and welcome to everyone. I'm so glad that you all can join us today. I'm Hayley, also known as Pages of Hayley on YouTube and Instagram, and I make bookish content online. And thank you all for coming to our Dangerous Woman Book Club and author event. So, our book club on Fable began reading together last year, and we focused primarily on discussing powerful women in literature and how they influence and inspire us. So if you haven't already, please join our club and start reading and discussing with us. There should be a link in the chat. And on the Fable app, it's super cool because we're able to read and share annotations and start conversations right inside the book, like Wattpad, but for bestsellers. So that's super fun. If that sounds interesting, definitely sign up. So today, I'm super honored to be welcoming the incredible author of our latest read, An Ember in the Ashes, Sabaa Tahir. Everyone, give her a warm welcome. So, Sabaa Tahir is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of An Ember in the Ashes series, which has been translated into over 35 languages. She grew up in California's Mojave Desert at her family's 18-room motel. There, she spent her time devouring fantasy novels, raiding her brother's comic book stash, and playing guitar badly. She began in Ember in the Ashes while working nights as a newspaper editor, and she likes thunderous indie rock, garish socks, and all things nerd. So I'm beyond excited to be having this conversation with you, Sabaa, and I want to thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Of course, I'm very excited to chat with you today.
Awesome. Okay, so I guess we'll start with some questions that I have. So my club read An Ember in the Ashes for like the past a month and a half, and everyone loved it, which I mean is no surprise. I talk about this book all the time on my channel. I get so many messages from people being like, I love this book so much. Like, I need to go buy the whole series right now. And it makes me so happy. So I'm so glad that everyone loved the book. And so, for some of our newer members who might not be as familiar with your works, how would you describe the books that you write? Like, is there a specific community that you write for?
Um, I write for, I think it's taking me a while to actually come to this answer, but I write for the younger version of myself, really, or anyone who might be like the younger version of myself. So I was a brown kid growing up in the Mojave Desert, as you said in the bio. I didn't really see myself in books. I never saw anyone who looked like me as a hero. Um, Brown people in like movies and books were either kind of the butt of a joke or um like we're the terrorists, you know, or we're like poor and starving. And that's such a strange like thing to see reflected back at yourself
Mhm.
as a child, and it's such a harmful and negative thing. So when I started Ember, like one of the first things that happened very naturally was that Laya was a brown girl and Elias was a brown boy, and I just wanted that to be you know, what they looked like physically, even if they didn't, you know, even if they weren't coded like according to country or background or ethnicity in our world, because it is a like alternative universe fantasy. So
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. I remember when I first picked up this book, I was so excited to see a brown girl like front and center in this story because like I never see that. And like you said, a lot of times if there are brown characters, they're usually like some kind of awful like stereotyped role. So it's amazing to see someone look like myself be a hero and just be loved. And so like I'm
yeah.
so grateful for that.
Oh, thank
So
you. That's wonderful to hear.
So, moving on to our next question, what inspired you to write An Ember in the Ashes? Like, was there a specific event or person that drew you into creating those specific settings and characters?
So there were a few things that had a pretty big impact on me. So I'm going to talk about three of them. I There was one that came first, but it kind of doesn't matter in a way. So the first thing is that when I was in my early 20s, I was writing a contemporary novel. That novel actually ended up becoming all my rage, but at the time it was like kind of autobiographical, kind of fictional, didn't know what I was doing, and I was having a really hard time with it, and I was whining about it constantly. And I would whine about it to my mom, and my mom eventually was like, "You know, you complain about this book so much. Why don't you go write a fantasy book? You love fantasy." And I was like, "Mom, no one will take me seriously if I write fantasy," because I was 20 and I didn't know anything. And then after a while, I was like, "Why wouldn't I write fantasy?" Like, I loved writing fantasy when I was a little kid, and when I not even a little kid, when I was in my teens, and it really was my happy place as a teenager. So I decided, okay, like, that's what I'm going to do at some point. So then the second element is I was working at the Washington Post as an editor on the foreign news desk. And every night I was reading stories from war zones across the world. And some of the stories were particularly sticky, they just kind of stayed with me. So things about the Sudanese genocide, which was going on at that time, child soldiers in Liberia, the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and the occupation of Kashmir. So those were all happening at the time, and all of that kind of inspired the story too. And then the very last thing was I was living in a basement, and there was this huge storm, and I was by myself. My husband was traveling somewhere, and it was like late at night, and it was pouring rain. And if anyone has lived in the East Coast, particularly the Mid Atlantic, like the summer storms are intense, like really loud, and there's lightning and thunder, and it's completely different from California. And I saw like the storm was raging, and I usually like storms, but I looked out the window and I saw these two eyes, and they were red, and they were like at eye level. They weren't like on the ground like an animal or something. And immediately my first thought was Jen. And so I ran into my room like any self-respecting grown adult would do, and I hid for the rest of the night. And then the next day I went out and I realized that like I was actually looking, like, because I was in a basement, it was actually lower than I thought. And so it was like a fence. And I was like, oh, it probably was like a cat or something. Or maybe it was a Jen. I don't know. But those were the three different events that kind of led to me being in the headspace to create this series.
That's awesome. No, I always love hearing about authors like origin stories with their books. And it's so fascinating to hear that you originally started with All My Rage, which
Yep.
just came out now. And I know that that was
Yeah.
like a really long process for you.
Very long.
So
Yes.
do you
If
want to kind
anyone
of
is a
talk about
writer,
that?
yeah, sure. If anyone's a writer and they've been working on a book for a long time, it's okay. Madeline Miller took 10 years to write Song of Achilles, and I took 15 years to write All My Rage. So it's fine. So All My Rage was inspired by, growing up at this motel. And when I was in my early 20s, my parents sold it. And I didn't really get any closure on this place that I had such a big impact on me. So, I kind of wanted to go there, and I wanted to, I don't know, just like sort of acknowledge all these ghosts that this place had for me, and I didn't get that opportunity. And so I ended up starting work on this book. But it was, I needed like 20 years of distance from this place before I was able to really write about it like thoughtfully. It ended up taking, it was less than 20 years ultimately, but actually by the time All My Rage came out, 20 years had passed since I had actually like been to like lived or spent any real significant time at the motel. So um it was a very strange place, and the place I grew up was a very singular town. Like, I think a lot of people who have been through the Mojave Desert and know that town, like when you say, "Oh, I wrote a book about it," or whatever, they're like, "Oh yeah." Like they know why immediately. Like
Mhm.
they're familiar with sort of the weirdness of these little desert towns. And so that's kind of where that story started. And then as time went on, it changed. It started off as like a series of short stories that were interconnected. Then it sort of became about one member of this family. Then it expanded to her son. Then that expanded to his best friend. Initially, they were gender swapped. And, then I was like, no, it doesn't feel right. And so then I switched them back. And there was just a lot of back and forth. And there was a lot of like, Sabaa doesn't know what she's doing. I don't know how to write a contemporary novel. and trial and error, because
Mhm.
you can read a million trillion books and still have no idea how to write one.
Right,
So,
exactly.
so that was what was going on at that time.
Yeah, I definitely understand that as a writer, the trial and error. And, sometimes you write like thousands and thousands of words, you realize it's not going to work out. You're just like, well, I guess I got to start over. And it
Yeah,
just happens. But
yeah. And I see someone in the chat saying that they're from this town and that they know, and that's it. Like if you know, you know. It's like one of those types of
yeah.
situations. So,
Yeah, kind of coming off of that topic, because I know like you obviously wrote An Ember in the Ashes, and then now you have a contemporary book. I'm curious to know like what were the differences between writing fantasy and contemporary, and like what were some challenges that you faced?
so I think the biggest thing was when I wrote fantasy, I had to build this huge world, and I can't overestimate how difficult that is. Like, it is really, really um, difficult, not just to build the world, but then to like hold it back, right?
Mhm.
Because everything that happens in the fourth book of the series, it's like that whole storyline. It's like I knew it was going to happen. I had everything planned out, but to then wait and have to kind of hold over the course of 13 years and be like, okay, I have to give the information like sporadically. It has to, keep the story interesting. I don't want to give away too much at once. Like that was really hard. And so there's this huge reveal in the third book. There's another really, really big reveal in the fourth book. I'm going to say what they are. I won't spoil it for anyone, but those things were like a decade in the making,
Wow.
and so
Yeah.
that was really difficult to hold that back, and then just to kind of know like where does the story really start, where does it end,
Yeah.
how do you write these middle books, how do you write these bridge books that are not the first in the series or the last in the series, which kind of come a little bit easier. So that was all really tricky. I don't know if I'd ever do a 4 book series again, to be honest. I
Wow.
think that it was a very, very complicated exercise. I am thrilled that I feel like it really worked out for Ember, but I don't know if I would do it again. I'd probably stick to a duology or a trilogy. So um and then with AMR, All My Rage, the most difficult thing was not turning to fantasy elements for either tension or to solve
Mhm.
problems. Like there are so many times where I'm like, I don't know how to get myself out of the situation. Like there's
Yeah.
no magic, there's no sword fights. Like there's nothing that I can use here that can, I have to think about what would actually happen in the real world. And that could be not just difficult sometimes, but painful, because these are characters who deal with some really difficult issues and difficult situations, very similar to a lot of young people of color in our world right now.
Right.
And to to be able to not just portray that, but portray it realistically and portray what would actually happen as opposed to sort of a rosy colored glasses view, that was hard, because I really did
Mhm.
just want to like wrap them in blankets and like put them in a cocoon and be like, you're safe
Yeah.
here. Like, I couldn't do that. So
Yeah, no, that's something that I really love about your books is like how much they reflect reality. Like even though Ember is a fantasy series, it still deals with like so many real world issues. And as you mentioned, like your characters deal with a lot of hard stuff. Like you put them through so much stuff and it's like very hard to read. But like I can't imagine how hard it is to write that. And yet you still manage to have like an amazing balance between like the tough moments and then still having these soft pockets of like nice happy stuff, and I'm like, how do you like create that balance? How did you come up with such a perfect ending to your series? That's something that it just like blows my mind every time I think about it.
So I have to give credit where credit is due here. I am so lucky in my beta readers and my friends. They often will rein me in. They will be like, Sabaa, you're being a little too mean. You need to like give us some joy. And for Sky particularly, again, I won't spoil the endings for anyone who has not read it yet, but for Sky particularly, I sent in a version to my dear friend Nicola Yoon, who's the author of The Sun Is Also a Star, Everything, Everything, and Instructions for Dancing. If you haven't read them, please go read them. They're wonderful. And Nicola Yoon writes about, she writes these love stories, like these 3 books that she's written are these love stories, but they have a lot of depth and the characters go through a lot. And one of the things that I've always really loved about her books is how joyful they are.
Mhm.
And she kind of got to the end of the first version of Sky and she was like, I need more joy. Like, you need to put more happy. She's like, you have it, but it's almost like you're stopping yourself because you haven't, you just had this whole book that was just full of craziness.
Yeah.
And now it's like almost like you're not there yet. So I stopped and I thought about it and I was like, I think you just saved this book. And I went and I rewrote a lot of the ending to get that sense of joy and like,
Mhm.
and peace and sort of hope. To really like cement it at the end of the book. That was very important, especially considering all the stuff that happened. So
Yeah. No, it's like such a perfect ending. So, I mean, really like having beta readers is just incredible as a writer,
yes,
and
it is.
they're awesome. So thank you to them. And Nicola Yoon is phenomenal. So
Yes,
it's
she's
awesome that,
incredible
yeah,
writer.
yeah. So what is your writing process like from the beginning of just getting an idea to seeing it all the way through to the end and like finishing that draft?
So it's pretty like amorphous at the beginning. Right now, I have like 6 ideas on the back burner. Sometimes I'll work on one, and I will be all in and I'll have another deadline. I'll be like ignoring the other deadline just so I can get this idea out. And then I might come back to it for like 6 months. So the early stages are very kind of loose, and I'm like thinking of scenes and I'm thinking of big moments and big like set pieces, almost like places where things happen. So right now I have this sort of I think I can probably say this without like spoiling anything, but I have this it's almost like a temple or like a monastery, and there's a bunch of stuff happening at this one place. And so
Mhm.
what I thought of first is what this place looks like, and then I can kind of see like all the different things that can happen there. So Blackcliff Academy is a really good example of that. Like, I thought about this school and then I started thinking of all the different scenes that could happen and where they could happen. So that's one thing that I do. And then I also I start to think, I start with character really, and I'm like, okay, who are my characters? Um, what do they want? Why do they want it? And what's in their way? It's like the classic goal, motivation, and conflict method of writing. Um, and then I think about those same questions, for the book and then for each chapter. And
Mhm.
then once I kind of have a sense, I just go through and try to figure out, okay, there are sort of general, if you're writing genre fiction, you're not writing literature. All My Rage was a little different because it was more kind of literary, if you will. I wasn't expecting to write a literary book, but that's just kind of how it appeared. Um, it didn't have as many like genre restrictions, so I kind of was able to write it as I wished. But with fantasy books, generally you want to have an inciting incident. You want to have something that
Right.
starts the action. You want to have like a midpoint where, your hero or heroine or whatever it might be is, or villain, is like learning some new information. Like, so there's like different points like that. So I'll try to figure out what those are. And then at that point, I have usually a beginning, an ending, and like 6 or 7 scenes in between. And then it's all about, and if I'm doing that for 3 characters, that's actually quite a bit of work done. um, so then it's really just about, okay, like, how do I weave these together? And that,
Right.
I don't know. It's a lot of coffee. My children being like, are you ever going to like ask us about our day again? My parents being like, are you going to call us ever again? Or are you just going to stay in the writing cave for the rest of your life? And my poor husband having to deal with like his crazy writer wife who's like, don't bother me. I'm in the weeds. Um, so I don't know how I would describe that process other than I am so so grateful for a family that is supportive of me, um, and that lets me like go be a cave troll, and like and not paying attention to them as I try to find the contours of a story.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like once you're in the moment and you're trying to figure everything out, it's so hard to like be distracted from that. And you just got to get everything down. Like, I totally understand that.
Hmm, hmm.
So, I have to know, did you have a favorite book to write?
I think Sky was my favorite book to write. I did love writing all of them. Reaper was a kind of a butt kicker. It was a difficult book to write. I'm also probably the most proud of Reaper as a result because I'm like, oh, I survived that book. But Sky was just a joy to write. It was a joyful book, you know. It was like
Mhm.
really fun to think of the twists and to like do all the evil stuff and to like, make it hurt. Like that was it was fun. It was fun to write. And then the ending was just it was a ton of fun. And this is not to say that I wasn't sad when certain things happened. I was very sad, but like it was
Yeah.
cathartic. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I totally get that. I'm like, it's a fun book to write, despite
Yes.
all the very intense things that happen. But I get
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, will you ever return to the Ember world? Because I know you said like, if you do another long series, but what about like, I don't know, short stories or novellas, like revisiting those characters?
My issue with short stories and novellas is that it almost feels like the same amount of work, but for less satisfaction for
Mm.
me personally. So I'm not really I've had a lot of people say like, "Oh, do a short story from the Ember world for Audible or whatever." And I just if I'm going to write something, whatever is next, it is going to be a big fat juicy book.
Yeah.
It's just going to be a big honker. Um so yeah, that's I think short stories and novellas are not where my head is at right now.
Mhm. But a big book, I think we would all love that. Like a big book
I
adding on
am
to the
working on
Ember
a
world.
fantasy. I am working on a fantasy. Yeah, a big, big, juicy fantasy. So I actually read some of it. I read some of it at a book, another book club at the Baraka Book Club a couple of weeks ago. So I don't have it. Otherwise, I would offer to read some of it
Oh
now,
my
but I don't
gosh.
have it. So sorry.
No, that was one of my other questions though. Like, what are some things that you're working on, like some new projects, if you can talk about them?
So let's see. I have a short story coming out in an anthology by Samira, edited by Samira Ahmed and Sona Charpotray. I'm sorry, I'm literally blank. Even though I just turned this story in, I'm blanking on the name of the anthology because I have the memory of a teaspoon. But I'm working on that, or I just finished that, and I just turned that in, and that was pretty fun to write. And then I just turned in the All My Rage script, which was like the second or third or 2000th draft. I don't remember which. And so I just turned that in a few weeks ago. So that was a really big deal because it was a lot of I've been working on that for gosh, probably like a year and a half now. Like in terms of different drafts of it. So that was really fun. And then I have this big fantasy book I'm working on, and I can't really share anything. I can't share too much about it other than what I've kind of already shared. So if you've heard it before, I'm sorry. But it is about a sort of philosopher, like warrior prince, and then a person who's sorry, a tracker, and then a person who's held captive and then escapes. I'm sorry, give me 1 second. I'm on retreat right now, and someone is knocking on my door. Sorry.
No worries. Okay, I just want to let everyone know that in a few minutes, we're going to do some audience questions. So if you have any, start to think about some questions that you might want to ask.
I'm sorry. He was like really
That's
insistent.
okay. That's okay.
He was like, but I have something I have to give you. I was like, okay, God.
Yeah, no, that fantasy book, it all sounds amazing, but like I'm just like such a fiend for fantasy. And like every time you post about this new book, I'm like foaming at the mouth. I need it so badly. So I'm so excited. It sounds amazing. I can't wait. And congratulations for turning in your script. That's incredible. I feel like what is that transition like working like going from prose to then like doing a script? So I feel like it's such a huge difference.
It is very difficult. It is probably one of the most difficult things that I've done. And I think it was made more, I'm just like real talk here. Like, I think it was made more difficult because in choosing to focus on All My Rage, I realized that I was a little bit having to let go of the dream of Ember. That was already happening just because Hollywood is Hollywood. Like, I probably don't need to say more than that. But to finally sort of turn to this other thing and say, okay, you know, maybe Ember will happen one day, but that day is not now and it's not soon. And I need to find a way to still tell these stories that really matter to me. And one of those ways might be to simply offer up something that is more cheaper to make for Hollywood, right? Like, it will not cost them a lot to make All My Rage. Completely different from
Right.
Ember. And so to that was actually like the psychological part of it was that. And the actual writing of it, I'm so grateful. I have an incredible co-writer. It's my older brother, Amir Salim. We've been writing together. We've been writing scripts together for a really long time, but he's also my first reader, you know, my best critic, my best beta reader, you know, the person I talk to about my stories, like the deep details about my stories, and also the person who kind of helps keep me sane as I go through this process. And he's an incredibly gifted screenwriter, and so working on All My Rage with him, especially him being a Pakistani man and having that insight into Salahuddin's character, like that's just been incredible. And he's taught me so much about how to be a more effective screenwriter. I would say like anything good in the script probably came from him.
That's really amazing to hear. And it must be really rewarding to go from writing your books and then to have that adaptation to be such a big part of like writing the script and to do it with someone so beloved as your brother. Like that just sounds awesome. Super lucky as well.
I'm very grateful for it. Yes.
Okay, so last question from me. Do you have any advice on writing or the publishing industry for young authors? And I want to say maybe specifically for authors of color, because I know that it can be like a different type of journey for them. I know.
So I will offer publishing advice as opposed to, you know, and that is find friends in this industry and don't be afraid to reach out to people who you might think won't reach back. So, you know, I remember recently getting a message from Alex Astor, who's written this book called Light Lark that's coming out. It's awesome. And it's coming out in like a month, I think a month. And Alex wrote Middle Grade before, and I had seen her book, but I had not had a chance to read it. And she reached out to me and just said, "Hey, you know, would you want to do an event?" And she has Colombian heritage, and I, you know, read the book and I loved it, and I gave it to my son, and my son loved it. And so I was like, "Yeah, cool." But if she hadn't reached out to me, like I wouldn't have made that connection. You know, she wouldn't have made that connection. And then I read Light Lark, and like that's somebody who to me it's like I love that she was like, I like this author, I like their work, let me reach out to them. And that's how I actually made a lot of my friends early on. Like a good example is Marie Lou, who read Ember because a friend of mine sent it to her, and then I was like, oh my God, I love your work so much, you know, but then we became friends. And so I think it's sort of just about like finding your people, whether that's people who are published or people who are not published, but find the people who you can trust to like support you or to give you advice or to tell you how things go or to say, hey, you know, this agency is trustworthy and this one maybe not so much, or to even answer the questions of like, you know, I've had people reach out to me, people who I don't know, just say, hey, I hope this isn't weird, but like I have a weird publishing question. I can't find an answer on Google. I mean, don't send writers questions you can find the answers to on Google. Like, don't do that. But, you know, I had someone reach out recently to me and they said, hey, so I was wondering if I'm writing this type of book, but I eventually want to write, if I'm writing a YA, but I eventually want to write an adult, how would I say that to an agent, and so it's like I was able to just sort of explain like, okay, this is how you would do it, and you probably wouldn't start with that. You would sort of ease into it later.
Mhm.
But that's the type of stuff that you don't know when you first start, and so to be able to have people who are in the industry and who are working on kind of the same thing as you is helpful.
Yeah,
So find
that's
your people.
definitely, yeah. That's amazing advice. Like it can be so scary joining in such like a huge community with publishing, but once you find your people and people that you can kind of fall back on, it definitely is a lot less intimidating. So
Yeah,
thank you
yeah,
for that.
absolutely. Of course.
All right, so we're gonna move on to audience questions. I see some people have put their questions in the Q&A area. So guess you can pick some questions or have me pick them, whatever you want.
I will let you pick them.
Okay.
Oh, Azanta asked a great question.
Oh
I think
yeah,
I
she did.
answered Hope's question. I think I answered, unless she wants to know technically. Honestly, Hope, it's a lot of wake up, procrastinate, take my children to school, procrastinate some more, eat some chocolate, write, eat some lunch, write, do some more procrastination, afternoon tea,
Mhm.
and then basically when I'm getting close to deadline, I panic and tell my family that I'm going to disappear, and which is what I'm doing right now. And then I go hide in usually like either a friend's house or like someplace where no one is going to bother me, and I write until 4 in the morning, and then I wake up early, and then I write all day, and I do that for like 5 days in a row. So it's very healthy.
Yeah, the writer day in the life, especially on deadline, it's very intense.
It's very intense, yes. And then I see Azanta's question. Hi, Azanta. So thank you. Magic has no borders. Thank you. I appreciate you for knowing that. So my story, I think it's okay to, is it okay to say what it's called? I don't know. You know what? I don't know what I'm allowed to share. Um, I will say that it is about a Peri, which in my culture is sort of like a fairy. And she is very, very angry. She is an angry Peri, and yeah, I'll leave it at that. She's angry. And there's a boy, and then there's a piece of sea glass. Those are the three things I can share.
They sound amazing. I love angry
And
female
it's
characters.
typical Sabaa, which means it has a sort of a face punch of an ending. So sorry.
No, I'm looking forward to that. Even if it hurts me, I'm very much so looking forward to it. Okay, let's see. Hmm.
Sorry, I
Oh,
can pick some more if you want. So I can. Sorry, you want me to just go through these?
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, how do you decide who to kill off in your books? I think many of us know who I'm referring to. So I don't really like think really far ahead of time, who am I going to kill? I do have a sense of like, okay, I don't think this character is going to make it. Generally, what I try to think about is what would actually happen in a particular situation. So, in Ember, I'm sorry, in Torch, there's a character who dies, and a lot of people were really sad that this character died. But to me, in that particular situation, it would have been impossible for this group to have gotten out of that situation without one of the characters getting killed, because there was too much pressure from the opposing forces. And then in terms of which character it would be, I felt like every other character would kind of have a chance at really defending themselves, except for this one who would be
Mhm.
trying but wouldn't quite get there because she's unable to. Sorry, I just gave away the gender, but and that to me is sort of what makes it clear that a character is not going to make it. And so there is a big character death in Sky, and I felt like I actually tried to work around that. I was like, no, I
Oh,
don't want to do it, and I kind of rewrote it, and then that scene was not working. Like
mm,
it just was not falling into place. And I just realized, I was like, this doesn't make any sense unless this happens. And so then, it had to happen. And that's just my writing process,
mhm.
like everyone is different. I have had people be like, you know what, I don't want to read your books anymore because you're mean. And I'm like, that's cool. Like, if you don't want to read books in which the writer is like really focused on characters going through things, and that's a lot of their growth. I totally get that. Not all people grow because they go through things, right? That just happens to be the style that I write. But I mean, I've read plenty of books where characters don't necessarily go through, awful experiences, but they still
Mhm.
grow as people. So I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah.
No issue. No judgment. um is the new fantasy book that you're writing going to be YA or adult? It is going to be YA. That was easy. Do I look at other YA novels and authors for inspiration or references? I do not actually. It's funny. I've started reading so much less YA lately because I'm always writing YA, and I hate reading in genre or in age group when I'm writing something. So that means that I usually have like these tiny spaces of time where I can read YA books. And that's why usually it's like if someone's like, will you blurb my book? I'm like, in 2026, like, I'll be able to, right? So I don't. It's just not. It does. I don't find it helpful at all. I find art really helpful, like visual art. I find poetry really helpful. Film to some degree, not as much. Um, I find news stories and news articles, feature stories really helpful. I find like long reads, like long form pieces really helpful in my writing. Honestly, because a lot of times they just sort of remind me what the structure of good story is. And I think that's really important. Okay, you know what, Hayley? I'm gonna let you ask whichever ones you want now because there are so
Okay.
many. I don't. I
Yeah.
feel like it's too much pressure. Okay, I run away. I run away from the Q&A section.
Okay. I think we have time for like two more questions.
Okay.
So I've got to pick something good, something juicy. Ooh, okay. What was your favorite part of writing the Ember series?
Um, I think it was writing these long character arcs. So I have definitely seen um series in which you have some growth in the first couple of books and then it sort of stalls and then you're going to get a little bit at the end. And I really wanted to write a book or a series where the character is going sort of starting in one place and then getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So like Laya really starts as like very family oriented. And then her mission becomes a little bit bigger. It becomes like, about at this prison. And then her mission becomes a little bit bigger. It becomes about like a larger group of people. And then it becomes about saving the world. And I wanted to be able to kind of build up to that transition because I've never found it realistic to read books where you have somebody who starts off as like, I don't know, a farm boy, and then by the end of the book they're doing some like huge stuff. I really prefer to have like a more gradual character growth. And it's actually the same for a character like Helene, who's sort of growing in a different way, right? Like this is the character who really starts off the series as this, she's a colonizer, she's drinking the Kool-Aid, she's not a hero, right?
Right.
It's sort of interesting, a lot of people adore Helene, but she's not. I wrote her sort of almost like we're in her head, so of course she's the hero of her own story, but anyone else looking at her, Laya especially, is kind of like, you're awful. you know and so
Yeah.
her story as well, her journey as well, was really fascinating to write because as a person of Pakistani descent, coming from a place that was so heavily influenced and abused and destroyed and and um, and sort of really crushed by colonization, I wanted to be able to write a story from the point of view of a colonizer. It was just sort of my own way of kind of interpreting it, right?
Mhm.
Because I feel like I did not get it. I wanted the chance to do that, and I don't feel like we as people of color are always allowed that. I noticed a few years ago there was like a lot of criticism sort of starting to come out being like, oh, we don't want colonizer stories. But I also noticed that a lot of the people being criticized were people of color. And it was kind of like, well, you don't have a problem with white authors telling this story. Why do you have a
Right.
problem with me telling this story? Think about that. Think about what it is that bothers you so much about me sort of telling that story of the colonizer. So that was also something that I really learned a lot from. So yeah, sorry, that was kind of a long answer.
No, it was great. No, I loved hearing all about it. Okay. I have actually want to ask two more questions. One is super short though.
No problem. No
Um,
problem.
but the question is what what are you currently reading now? Or if you had to recommend one book, what would you recommend to everyone?
Let's see. Right now, I am reading, I actually have it here. Sorry. I'm reading this book. It's called Hamnet. And this is what I
I was
meant
gonna read
about like
that.
reading a book that's like nothing like what I'm writing. This is not, it's just, it's like a historical fiction
Mhm.
about Shakespeare, which is
Yeah.
not at all close to what I'm writing. So I'm reading that, and it's very interesting so far. I will talk about sort of fun, happy books that I've read recently and really enjoyed. I don't know if you'd call this fun and happy. Um, Really gripping books that I've read recently. So I read. I'm sorry, my brain is like frying on me, but I read Real Easy by Marie Rutkowski, and I
I just
really
started
liked
that
that
one.
one. A Thousand Steps Into Night is great. Um, Light Lark, that's coming out soon, and that was really fun. It's just a fun story. Blade Breaker by Victoria Aveyard. That's the second in her Realm Breaker series, and I freaking loved it. I was like, this is so good. It was so juicy and fun. It's just a fun fantasy. And then a last one, I'm trying to think of something. I just read oh god, Book Lovers by Emily
Oh
Henry.
yeah.
I think that's what it's called. I want to
Mhm.
say I is it Beach Lovers or Book Lovers?
I think it's Book Lovers, like her most recent one.
Book Lovers. Okay, so I thought it was like such a fun. I read it at the beach, which is maybe why I'm confused. And it was like such a great like fun, forget your troubles beach read. So yeah, Book Lovers. Yeah. So
Mhm.
um,
Wow. I've been hearing a lot about all of those books. And so if you're recommending them, then it must mean I need to read them. So thank you.
of course.
Last question. This is from Stacy. Which of your characters, if any, would you say have had the most impact on you, whether personally or professionally?
Which of my characters?
Yes.
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I've never gotten that question before. I really like it. Um, okay, so I'm gonna do one for All My Rage and then one for Ember because they're so
Okay.
different that I don't. So for Ember, I would say the character who had the biggest impact on me was Elias. And the reason why is that Elias is a character who was very challenging to write at first. And then as I got to know him, I was like, oh, I understand who you are. You're like a version of me. And I learned a lot about myself as I wrote Elias. And I learned a lot about the good things about myself as I wrote Elias and like the things about me that my friends value and that my family values. And as somebody who did not have a lot of self worth growing up and through most of my 20s and a lot of my 30s, that was a really beautiful experience. So thanks, Elias.
Yeah.
And then for All My Rage, I think Misbah was a character who taught me a lot because Misbah is a mother character. And I think I could not have written Misbah, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, the way I wrote her, as I was writing this book, because I had not experienced some of the sort of highs and lows of not just being a parent, but then having an aging parent and dealing with the difficulties of parenthood while also coming to terms with accepting and not holding a grudge for the mistakes that my own parents might have made. Those two things happened kind of at the same time. And I think a large part of that was just writing the character of Mispa that kind of helped me see.
Awesome. I mean,
Thanks,
those are
Mispa.
such, yeah. I mean, oh, I love her character so much, and Elias too. I think all of your characters are just so powerful and they just feel so real. And that's just something I really, really love about your book.
Oh, thank
So,
you. That really means a lot to me. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
of course. And that was our last question. So, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. I had an amazing time. It really was a pleasure to have this conversation with you and to talk about my favorite books, my favorite author. It still does not feel real. And I appreciate all the amazing insight that you're able to provide for us. And for everyone watching, you can find out more about Sabaa at her website, sabaatahir.com. And I really hope that everyone had a great time. And once again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you guys. Thank you again, Hayley. Have a good night, everyone.
You too. Bye.